The maid was fired for theft, but when she showed her pendant, the millionaire fell to his knees. The summer heat in Charleston was merciless, beads of sweat forming on Olivia Blake's forehead as she scrubbed the marble floor of the Lancaster mansion's grand entrance. At 32, her hands were already showing signs of premature aging, the price of 8 years of cleaning other people's homes. "Mom, did you remember my pills?" Madison's voice echoed from the hallway, her small frame leaning against the ornate doorframe. Olivia looked up, a smile instantly softening her tired features. "Of course, sweetie. They're in my bag. Aren't you supposed to be resting?" Madison rolled her eyes in that distinctly preteen way. "I've been resting all day. I'm bored." Despite the perpetual worry that accompanied raising a child with a congenital heart condition, Olivia couldn't help but marvel at her daughter's resilience. At 12, Madison should have been playing soccer with friends or gossiping about boys, not memorizing medication schedules and recognizing early signs of cardiac distress. "I'm almost done here," Olivia said, wringing out her mop in the bucket. "Then we can—" "What is she doing here?" Diane Holloway's voice sliced through the conversation like a sharpened blade. The elegant 60-year-old wife of Edward Lancaster stood at the top of the sweeping staircase, her disapproving gaze fixed on Madison. "Mrs. Lancaster," Olivia said, straightening up. "Madison wasn't feeling well this morning, so I had to bring her with me. She's staying in the back room out of everyone's way." Diane descended the stairs, her heels clicking against the marble like tiny hammers. "The arrangement was clear when we hired you. Olivia, no visitors, no exceptions." "I understand, ma'am, but is there a problem?" Alexis Lancaster appeared from the east wing, her designer sunglasses perched atop her perfectly highlighted hair. At 35, Edward's daughter was the epitome of old money, beautiful, polished, and utterly contemptuous of those she deemed beneath her. "Nothing I can't handle," Diane replied, her eyes never leaving Olivia. "Our housekeeper seems to think the rules don't apply to her." Olivia bit her tongue, the familiar taste of swallowed pride filling her mouth. "It won't happen again, Mrs. Lancaster. Madison will wait for me in the caretaker's cottage." "See that she does," Diane said with a dismissive wave. "And when you're done with the entrance, my dressing room needs attention. The spring gala committee is meeting here tomorrow." As Diane and Alexis disappeared into the study, Madison moved closer to her mother. "Why do they hate us so much?" she whispered. "They don't hate us, sweetie," Olivia said, though the lie tasted bitter. "They just live in a different world than we do, a world where they treat people like dirt." "Madison Blake," Olivia admonished gently, though her heart swelled with pride at her daughter's perception. "Go back to the cottage and take your medication. I'll be there in an hour." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of polishing, dusting, and scrubbing. Olivia's thoughts drifted, as they often did, to the life she'd fled 8 years ago, a small town where everyone knew your business and mistakes followed you like shadows. Charleston had been her fresh start, a place where she could raise Madison away from painful memories and judgmental stares. The Lancaster mansion had been both a blessing and a curse. The pay was good. The caretaker's cottage provided free housing, and the health insurance covered most of Madison's medical expenses. But the daily humiliations and the barely concealed disdain from the family were a high price to pay when Olivia finally entered Diane's dressing room. She was surprised to find her employer frantically searching through drawers and jewelry boxes. "Where are they?" Diane muttered, tossing aside silk scarves and velvet pouches. "Can I help you find something, Mrs. Lancaster?" Olivia offered. Diane spun around, her face flushed with anger. "My emerald set? The one Edward gave me for our 30th anniversary. It's missing. Perhaps you left it at the jeweler's. You mentioned having the clasp repaired." "Don't be ridiculous," Diane snapped. "I picked it up last week. It was right here." She pointed to an empty velvet box on her vanity. Olivia's stomach tightened. "I haven't seen it, Mrs. Lancaster. Would you like me to help you look?" Diane's eyes narrowed. "When was the last time you cleaned in here?" "Yesterday morning, but I didn't touch your jewelry. I know the rules." "Mom, what's taking so long?" Alexis appeared in the doorway, her expression shifting as she assessed the scene. "What's wrong?" "My emerald set is missing," Diane said, her voice tight with accusation. "The one with the teardrop pendant and matching earrings." Alexis's gaze slid to Olivia, a slow, dangerous smile forming. "Interesting timing, considering Madison's medication costs just went up again, didn't they? Olivia felt the blood drain from her face. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything, Alexis said coolly. I'm simply noting a coincidence. I would never, Olivia began, but was cut off by the sound of heavy footsteps. Edward Lancaster entered the room, his imposing figure filling the doorway. At 65, he still commanded attention, his silver hair and tailored suit projecting authority and wealth. What's all this commotion? He demanded. My emeralds are missing, Diane said, moving to her husband's side. The anniversary set. Edward's piercing gaze settled on Olivia. And you suspect the housekeeper. Who else has access to this room? Alexis interjected. And she has a sick kid who needs expensive treatments. Do the math, Dad. I didn't take anything, Olivia stated firmly, though her heart hammered against her ribs. I would never steal from you or anyone else. Edward studied her for a long moment. Perhaps a misunderstanding, Diane. Are you certain? I want the cottage searched, Diane interrupted. Now, Mrs. Lancaster, please, Olivia pleaded. Madison is there. She's not feeling well. All the more reason to recover my property quickly, Diane insisted. If you've nothing to hide, you've nothing to fear. What followed was the most humiliating experience of Olivia's life. 2 security guards tore through her modest possessions while Madison watched in tearful confusion. Drawers were emptied, mattresses upended, and even Madison's medical supplies were examined with suspicious scrutiny. No emeralds were found, but it didn't matter. By evening, Olivia stood in Edward Lancaster's study, facing a termination notice and an eviction order. You have until the end of the week, Edward said, not meeting her eyes. Your final check will include 2 weeks' severance. Mr. Lancaster, Olivia said, her voice steady despite her internal panic. I've worked for your family for 8 years without incident. I didn't take Mrs. Lancaster's jewelry. The evidence suggests otherwise, he replied coldly. What evidence? You found nothing in my home. You could have sold it already, Alexis suggested from her perch on the leather sofa, or hidden it somewhere else. I'm not a thief, Olivia insisted, desperation creeping into her voice. Madison's medication is not my concern any longer, Edward finished, finally looking at her with eyes that seemed oddly troubled. Good evening, Miss Blake. As Olivia walked back to the cottage, the weight of her situation crushed down on her. Without this job, without this home, without the insurance, Madison's condition would deteriorate rapidly. The medication alone cost more than most rent payments. She found her daughter sitting on the cottage steps, her face pale in the twilight. They're making us leave, aren't they? Madison asked, wise beyond her years. Olivia nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Because of the jewelry she lost, that she thinks I took, Olivia corrected, sitting beside her daughter and wrapping an arm around her thin shoulders. But I didn't, Madison. I need you to know that. I know, Mom, Madison said, leaning against her. What are we going to do now? Olivia stared at the imposing silhouette of the Lancaster mansion against the darkening sky. The windows glowing with light and privilege. 8 years of loyalty repaid with suspicion and cruelty. 8 years of swallowed pride and forced smiles wiped away in an instant. We'll figure something out, she promised, though she had no idea how to keep that promise. We always do. 3 weeks after being forced out of the Lancaster mansion, Olivia sat at her tiny kitchen table, bills spread before her like a losing hand of cards. The apartment they'd managed to find was a far cry from the caretaker's cottage, a 1-bedroom walk-up with water stains on the ceiling and neighbors who argued well into the night. Any luck? Madison asked, emerging from the bedroom they now shared, her school backpack slung over one shoulder. Olivia quickly shuffled the past due notices into a pile. Not yet, sweetie, but I've got 2 interviews today. It was technically true. She had an interview at a budget motel and another at a nursing home. What she didn't mention was that both were located in North Charleston, where her reputation hadn't yet been tarnished by Diane Lancaster's whisper campaign. My chest feels funny, Madison said, pressing a hand over her heart. Olivia was instantly alert, maternal instincts overriding her financial worries. Funny how? Sharp pain or pressure? Just tight and I'm really tired. Olivia guided her daughter to the sofa and checked her pulse. Too rapid, but not alarmingly so. Madison's face was paler than usual, the shadows under her eyes more pronounced. "Did you take your morning medication?" Olivia asked, trying to keep the worry from her voice. Madison nodded. "But we're almost out. There's only 2 pills left." Olivia's stomach twisted into a knot. Without insurance, Madison's medication cost nearly $400 a month, money they simply didn't have. The severance check from the Lancasters had barely covered the security deposit on this apartment and the first month's rent. "Don't worry about that," Olivia said, smoothing Madison's hair. "I'll figure it out." After making sure Madison was comfortable with a glass of water and strict instructions to rest, Olivia retreated to the bathroom. She stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror, noting the new lines around her eyes, the worry that had become a permanent fixture on her face. From the pocket of her jeans, she withdrew the last valuable thing she owned, a teardrop-shaped emerald pendant hanging from a delicate silver chain. The emerald itself cut in the shape of a half-moon intertwined with a small star. It had been her mother's, given to her on her deathbed when Olivia was just 10 years old. "This was your grandmother's, and her mother's before that," Linda Blake had whispered, her once vibrant voice reduced to a rasp. "It's been passed down through generations of Blake women. One day, you'll pass it to your daughter." Olivia had treasured it, wearing it only on special occasions, keeping it hidden the rest of the time. She'd never thought she'd have to sell it, but Madison's life was worth more than any heirloom. No matter how precious, an hour later, she stood outside Harrington & Sons Fine Jewelers in downtown Charleston. The elegant storefront, with its polished mahogany and gleaming display cases, made her acutely aware of her worn jeans and second-hand blouse. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door. A small bell announced her arrival, its cheerful chime at odds with her somber purpose. "Good morning," greeted an elderly man with wire-rimmed glasses and a measuring tape around his neck. "How may I help you today?" "I'd like to sell this," Olivia said, holding out the pendant. "It's been in my family for generations. But circumstances have changed." The jeweler, Mr. Harrington, according to his name tag, took the pendant with gentle hands, examining it through a jeweler's loupe. "Interesting piece. The craftsmanship is exceptional, Georgian era, if I'm not mistaken." "Is it valuable?" Olivia asked, hope fluttering in her chest. "The emerald itself is of good quality, though not extraordinary, but the setting and the unusual design. May I ask where your family acquired it?" "My mother said it was passed down through generations of women in our family. Beyond that, I don't know much about its history." Mr. Harrington nodded thoughtfully. "Let me consult with my son. He specializes in antique pieces." As the jeweler disappeared into a back room, the bell above the door chimed again. Olivia turned to see a tall man enter, his confident stride and tailored suit immediately marking him as someone accustomed to wealth and privilege. There was something familiar about him. The set of his jaw, perhaps, or the way he carried himself. It took her a moment to place him, and when she did, her heart sank. Though she'd never met him personally, she recognized Jonathan Lancaster from photographs in the mansion. The youngest son of Edward Lancaster had been abroad for years, but his picture had occupied a prominent place in his father's study. Jonathan nodded politely in her direction before approaching a different counter, where a young saleswoman immediately attended to him. Olivia turned away, hoping he wouldn't recognize her. The last thing she needed was another Lancaster humiliating her in public. "I'm looking for something special," she overheard him saying. "A gift for my fiancée. She's Italian, with very particular taste. We have several exclusive collections that might interest you, Dr. Lancaster," the saleswoman replied. "Are you thinking of diamonds or perhaps something more colorful?" So he was a doctor, not a businessman like his father and brother. That explained his absence from the family enterprise. Mr. Harrington emerged from the back room, his expression curious. "Ms. Blake, this pendant has a rather unusual design. The half-moon intertwined with a star is quite distinctive." Out of the corner of her eye, Olivia noticed Jonathan Lancaster's head turn slightly in their direction. "My son believes it may be a family crest or sigil of some kind," the jeweler continued. "It's not one we immediately recognize, but if you're interested, we could research it further." "I'm afraid I don't have time for research," Olivia said quietly. "I need to sell it today. My daughter's medication." Of course," Mr. Harrington said kindly. "Given its age and craftsmanship, I can offer you $200. It's a fair price for the piece, though if you could wait while we research its provenance, it might fetch more. It was less than she'd hoped for, but more than enough to cover Madison's medication for the next 3 months. I'll take it, she said with a resolute nod. As Mr. Harrington began preparing the paperwork, Olivia became uncomfortably aware of Jonathan Lancaster's gaze. When she glanced in his direction, he quickly looked away, though not before she caught an expression of what appeared to be shock on his face. The transaction completed, Olivia clutched the envelope containing $200 in cash and headed for the door. As she pushed it open, she heard Jonathan Lancaster's voice behind her. "Excuse me," he called. "Do you have a moment?" Every instinct told her to keep walking, to put as much distance as possible between herself and anyone named Lancaster, but something in his tone, urgency, not condescension, made her pause. "Yes," she asked, not bothering to hide her wariness. "That pendant you just sold," he said, his brow furrowed. "May I ask where you got it?" "It was my mother's," Olivia replied stiffly. "And her mother's before that, why?" Jonathan's eyes, a striking blue she hadn't noticed in photographs, studied her face intently. "The design is unusual. It reminded me of something, that's all." "Well, it's Mr. Harrington's now," Olivia said, taking a step backward. "If you'll excuse me, I have appointments to keep," as she hurried down the sidewalk. She couldn't shake the feeling that Jonathan Lancaster's interest in her pendant was more than casual curiosity, but with Madison waiting at home and 2 job interviews ahead of her, she had more pressing concerns than the odd behavior of a Lancaster. Behind her, Jonathan watched her disappear into the crowd, the family pendant clutched in his hand, the pendant he'd just repurchased from Mr. Harrington at 3 times its selling price. Olivia's interviews had gone better than expected. The motel manager had hired her on the spot for weekend shifts, and the nursing home had offered her a position cleaning during evening hours. Neither job paid well, but together they might just cover rent and Madison's medications. "Mom, there's someone at the door," Madison called from the sofa where she'd been resting since Olivia returned home. Olivia frowned. They weren't expecting visitors, and they'd kept a low profile since moving into the apartment. "Did they say who they are?" "He said he's a doctor, from the community health program." Olivia's suspicion flared. They hadn't applied for any community health services. Moving cautiously to the door, she peered through the peephole and felt her stomach drop. Jonathan Lancaster stood in the hallway. Holding a medical bag and looking decidedly uncomfortable, she yanked open the door. "What are you doing here?" she demanded in a harsh whisper. His eyes widened slightly, apparently surprised by her hostility. "Ms. Blake, I apologize for the unexpected visit. May I come in?" "How did you find me?" "I followed you," he admitted, having the grace to look embarrassed. "Not in a stalkerish way. I needed to talk to you about the pendant. You followed me from downtown." Olivia crossed her arms. "That's over an hour ago. I had some stops to make first," he explained, gesturing to his medical bag. "I really am a doctor, and I've become aware of your daughter's condition. I'd like to help." "We don't need Lancaster charity," Olivia said coldly, "especially after what your family did to us." Jonathan's expression shifted, confusion evident. "What did my family do?" Before Olivia could respond, Madison appeared by her side, curiosity overriding her usual caution around strangers. "Mom, are you going to let the doctor in? My chest still feels tight." Concern for her daughter trumped Olivia's mistrust. She stepped back reluctantly, allowing Jonathan to enter their small apartment. "I'm Dr. Jonathan Lancaster," he said, extending his hand to Madison. "And you must be Madison Blake." Madison nodded, studying him with the frankness only children can master. "Are you related to the people Mom used to work for?" "I am," Jonathan acknowledged, glancing at Olivia. "Though I've been away for many years. I just returned from Italy last month." "Is that why you talk funny?" "You have an accent," Madison observed. Jonathan laughed, a warm sound that seemed at odds with Olivia's image of the Lancaster family. "Do I? I suppose 15 years in Europe will do that to you." "Madison, doctor. Lancaster isn't here officially," Olivia said, steering her daughter back to the sofa. "And you should be resting." "Actually," Jonathan interjected, "I am here as a physician. I'm starting a volunteer program through Lancaster Memorial Hospital. focusing on pediatric cardiac care for underserved communities. He pulled out a business card with the hospital's logo. We're identifying candidates for a new treatment protocol. Olivia's eyes narrowed. The Lancaster Memorial Hospital was indeed the premier medical facility in Charleston, and Jonathan's credentials appeared legitimate, but the timing was too convenient. And you randomly found us how? She challenged. Jonathan hesitated, clearly weighing his words. The pendant led me to research your background. When I learned about Madison's condition, I realized I might be able to help. The pendant, Olivia repeated flatly. A family heirloom somehow connected you to my daughter's medical condition. It's complicated, he admitted, but my interest is genuine. May I examine Madison? No obligation. Completely free of charge. Madison looked up at her mother with pleading eyes. Please, Mom. My regular medicine isn't working as well anymore. Olivia recognized defeat when she saw it. Fine, but I'll be right here the whole time. Jonathan conducted a thorough examination, his manner shifting to that of a consummate professional. He listened to Madison's heart, checked her blood pressure, and reviewed her medication list with practiced efficiency. You've been managing her ventricular septal defect with captopril and Lasix, he asked, examining the nearly empty pill bottle. It's what Dr. Myers prescribed, Olivia said defensively. We haven't been able to see him since we lost our insurance. It's a standard treatment, Jonathan acknowledged. But there are newer options that might be more effective, especially for someone Madison's age. He turned to the girl. How long have you been feeling this increased tightness in your chest? About 2 weeks, Madison answered before Olivia could interject. It gets worse when I try to walk to school. You've been walking to school? Olivia asked, alarmed. You told me you were taking the bus. The bus costs $150 each way, Madison said quietly. I thought we needed to save money. Olivia felt like the worst mother in the world, while she'd been scrambling to find work. Her daughter had been quietly sacrificing her health to save $3 a day. Jonathan watched this exchange with an unreadable expression. Madison's condition is stable but deteriorating, he said gently. She needs an echocardiogram and possibly an adjustment to her medication regimen, which we can't afford, Olivia said, the weight of their situation crushing down on her anew. The volunteer program I mentioned covers all costs, Jonathan said, including transportation to and from appointments. If you're willing to enroll Madison, we could schedule her first comprehensive assessment for tomorrow. It seemed too good to be true, which meant it probably was. What's the catch? No catch, Jonathan insisted. The program is funded by a grant from the Lancaster Foundation. It's in the pilot stage, so we're limited to 20 patients. Madison would be number 17. He reached into his bag and produced a folder of documents. Here's all the information about the program, consent forms, and my credentials. Take your time reviewing it. My direct number is on the card I gave you. Call anytime with questions. As he packed up his equipment, Jonathan paused. May I ask what happened between you and my family? You mentioned they did something to you. Olivia let out a humorless laugh. Your stepmother accused me of stealing her emerald set. Your father fired me without cause and evicted us from the caretaker's cottage. Your sister made sure every wealthy family in Charleston knew I was a thief, making it impossible for me to find decent work. Jonathan's expression darkened. When did this happen? 3 weeks ago. Where were you, Dr. Lancaster? Saving lives in Italy while your family was destroying ours. I had no idea, he said, his voice tight with what seemed like genuine anger. I've been back for 2 weeks, but I've been staying at a hotel while my condo is renovated. I've barely seen my family. Madison, who'd been quietly listening, suddenly spoke up. If you're a Lancaster, why are you helping us? Your family hates us. Jonathan knelt to Madison's eye level. I don't know you well enough to hate you, he said seriously. And from what I've seen today, there's nothing to hate and much to admire. You're very brave, walking to school when you don't feel well. He stood facing Olivia. I'll leave you to review the program information, whether or not you decide to enroll Madison. I can give you a 3-month supply of her medication. He placed a paper bag on the coffee table. This should tide you over while you explore your options. Olivia was speechless, torn between desperate gratitude and lingering suspicion. Why are you really doing this? She finally asked as she walked him to the door. Jonathan paused, his hand on the doorknob. That pendant you sold, he said quietly. It bears the original Lancaster family crest, a design that hasn't been used publicly in over 100 years. Only a handful of people would recognize it. His eyes met hers, intense and searching. I need to understand how it came into your family's possession, but that can wait. Right now, Madison's health is the priority. Before Olivia could respond, he was gone, leaving her staring at the closed door with more questions than answers. Jonathan Lancaster sat in his grandfather's study, surrounded by leather-bound journals and faded photographs. The Lancaster estate's east wing had remained largely untouched since Walter Lancaster's death 33 years ago, preserved like a museum to the family patriarch. After 3 visits to Olivia's apartment over the past week, ostensibly to check on Madison's response to the new medication, Jonathan had become increasingly convinced that the connection between Olivia Blake and his family was more than coincidence. The pendant alone was compelling evidence, but there was something else. A fleeting resemblance between Olivia and an old photograph of his grandmother that had caught his eye during his first visit to the estate after returning from Europe. Still playing detective, a voice from the doorway startled him. His father, Edward Lancaster, stood watching him with an unreadable expression. "Research," Jonathan corrected, closing the journal he'd been reading. "For the pediatric cardiac program." Edward stepped into the room, his gaze sweeping over the scattered documents. "In your grandfather's study, with his personal diaries, I was looking for information on the original Lancaster Foundation," Jonathan improvised. "Before you restructured it in the 90s. His father's eyes narrowed slightly. "The foundation records are in the main office downtown, you know that." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Jonathan had always had a complicated relationship with his father. Edward had wanted his youngest son to join the family business, not waste his talents on medicine. Their 15-year estrangement had begun when Jonathan left for medical school in Europe against his father's wishes. "I heard you've been seeing patients outside the hospital," Edward finally said. "A volunteer program. Word travels fast," Jonathan replied carefully. "It's my hospital, son. Not much happens there without my knowledge." Edward picked up one of the photographs on the desk. Walter Lancaster standing beside a young woman Jonathan didn't recognize. "Any interesting cases?" "Patient confidentiality, Dad. But yes, there's a 12-year-old girl with a ventricular septal defect who's responding well to a new treatment protocol." Edward replaced the photograph with deliberate precision. "Madison Blake, I believe. Daughter of our former housekeeper." Jonathan felt a chill run down his spine. "You've been having me followed. Don't be dramatic. Charleston is a small city for people in our position. I have concerns about your involvement with the Blake woman." "Her name is Olivia," Jonathan said, an edge creeping into his voice. "And my involvement is purely professional. Madison's condition is exactly the type of case our program was designed to address. Is that why you purchased an antique emerald pendant from Harrington's last week? For professional reasons?" Edward's tone was mild, but his eyes were sharp. "Gerald Harrington and I have been friends for 40 years, Jonathan." He mentioned the unusual transaction. Caught off guard, Jonathan struggled to formulate a response. His father sighed heavily and lowered himself into the leather armchair across from the desk. "Son, there are things about this family, about your grandfather, that you don't know." Edward ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking every one of his 65 years. "Things I've tried to protect you from." "What things?" Jonathan asked, his curiosity piqued. Instead of answering directly, Edward reached for one of the journals on the desk, a worn, navy blue volume with the year 1991 embossed in faded gold on the spine. "Your grandfather was a complicated man," he said, turning the journal over in his hands. "Brilliant in business, but flawed in his personal life. After your grandmother died, he found comfort in inappropriate places." "You mean he had affairs?" Jonathan translated bluntly. Edward's mouth tightened. "Yes, several. Most were discreet, meaningless dalliances with women of our social circle. But one," he tapped the journal, "one threatened everything the Lancaster name stood for. And this relates to Olivia Blake. How?" "Her mother," Edward said quietly. "Linda Blake. She worked here as a personal assistant to your grandfather in the early 90s. Young, beautiful, ambitious. Walter was besotted with her." Jonathan's mind raced, connecting dots he hadn't even realized existed. "The pendant." Edward nodded grimly. The original Lancaster crest. Walter had it made for her, a token of his affection, encoded so only those who knew the family history would recognize it. Did they have a child together? Jonathan asked, his throat suddenly dry. Walter believed they did, Edward replied, his expression hardening. When Linda announced she was pregnant, he set her up in a house on the outskirts of Columbia, sent her monthly payments, planned to bring her and the child back after a suitable period, perhaps even marry her. He'd become completely irrational where she was concerned. What happened? He died before he could upend all our lives with his midlife crisis, Edward said, a hint of bitterness creeping into his voice. Heart attack, just like his father before him. I found his arrangements for Linda among his papers and continued the payments. A kindness. Nothing more. Did you ever meet the child? Jonathan pressed, thinking of Olivia's age. It aligned perfectly with this timeline. No, Edward said too quickly. Linda moved away after Walter died. I assumed she returned to her hometown. The payments went to a bank account. There was no direct contact. Something in his father's evasive gaze made Jonathan suspect he wasn't getting the full story. And you never thought to mention this when you hired Linda Blake's daughter as your housekeeper. That seems like quite a coincidence. I didn't make the connection until recently, Edward admitted. Blake is a common name. Olivia was recommended by the agency. It wasn't until I saw her wearing that pendant, just once, at a staff holiday gathering, that I began to suspect. So you fired her and evicted her when Diane's jewelry went missing, Jonathan concluded, knowing she might be your half-sister. Edward stood abruptly. The theft was real, Jonathan. Diane's emeralds are still missing, whether Olivia took them or not. I couldn't have a thief in my household. The family connection, if it exists, is irrelevant. It seemed relevant enough for you to investigate her after firing her, Jonathan countered. And don't tell me you haven't. You knew exactly who I was treating in my volunteer program. His father's face flushed with anger. You've been gone 15 years. Don't presume to judge how I protect this family. Is that what you call it? Protection. Jonathan stood as well, his own anger rising. A sick child and her mother living in a rundown apartment in the worst part of town. That's your idea of protecting the Lancaster name. You've always been an idealist, Edward said dismissively. Life isn't that simple. If Olivia Blake is Walter's daughter, then she's entitled to a share of his estate, Jonathan finished. The estate you inherited in its entirety. A tense silence filled the room. Finally, Edward spoke, his voice dangerously quiet. Be careful, son. You're treading on ground you don't understand. Your volunteer work with the girl is commendable, but I strongly advise you to maintain professional distance from the mother. After his father left, Jonathan returned to the journals with renewed determination. He found it in the last entry of the 1991 diary, dated just 3 days before Walter's death. Gave Elle the pendant today, had it made special, our family crest, but subtle enough that only someone who knows would recognize it. Told her it's to seal my promise. When the baby comes, I'll make things right, she cried. First time I've seen her cry. Asked me to promise the child would have the Lancaster name someday. I promised, God help me. I'll find a way to make Edward understand. This child is as much my legacy as he is. Jonathan closed the journal, his hands trembling slightly. If Olivia Blake was indeed Walter Lancaster's daughter, she wasn't just entitled to financial support. She was a Lancaster, his aunt. Not his half-sister as he'd initially suspected. And if his father had known this all along, Jonathan reached for his phone. He needed to see Olivia again. But this time, he would bring more than medical supplies. He would bring the truth. The emergency room at Lancaster Memorial Hospital buzzed with controlled chaos. Olivia paced the small waiting area, her heart pounding in her chest as doctors worked on Madison behind closed doors. Everything had happened so fast. One moment they were having breakfast. The next, Madison was clutching her chest, struggling to breathe. Ms. Blake. Olivia turned to see Jonathan hurrying toward her. Still wearing his white coat, stethoscope around his neck. The sight of him brought a complicated mix of relief and anxiety. I came as soon as I heard, he said. How is she? I don't know. Olivia's voice cracked. They took her back 20 minutes ago. No one's told me anything. Jonathan squeezed her shoulder gently. Let me find out what's happening. As he disappeared through the double doors, Olivia sank into a chair, exhaustion washing over her. The past 2 weeks had been a whirlwind. Madison's enrollment in Jonathan's program had brought state-of-the-art care and new medications that seemed to be working. Along with the treatments came Jonathan's increasingly frequent visits. First formal and clinical, gradually becoming more personal. She'd begun to trust him, despite his last name. The doors swung open, and Jonathan returned with Dr. Sarah Chen, a pediatric cardiologist Olivia recognized from Madison's intake evaluation. "Madison is stable," Dr. Chen said without preamble. "She experienced an arrhythmia episode, irregular heartbeats that temporarily reduced blood flow. We've administered medication to stabilize her rhythm and improve cardiac output." "What caused it?" Olivia asked. "She was doing better on the new medication, Doctor." Chen and Jonathan exchanged a glance that sent alarm bells ringing in Olivia's mind. "We'd like to run some additional tests," Jonathan said carefully. "Madison's condition is more complex than we initially thought." "Complex how?" Olivia demanded. "Just tell me what's wrong with my daughter, Doctor." Chen consulted the tablet in her hands. The preliminary echocardiogram shows abnormalities consistent with her diagnosed VSD, but there are additional structural issues that weren't documented in her previous medical records. "English, please," Olivia pleaded. "Madison appears to have a rare congenital heart condition called Schoen's complex," Jonathan explained. "It involves multiple left-sided heart defects that often present together. It's hereditary in some cases." The word hereditary hung in the air. Dr. Chen excused herself to check on other patients, leaving Jonathan alone with Olivia. "I need to ask you some difficult questions," he said quietly. "About Madison's father." Olivia stiffened. "Madison's father isn't in the picture. For medical reasons," Jonathan pressed. "We need a complete family history to provide the best care. Does heart disease run in his family?" "I don't know," Olivia admitted. "I didn't know him well enough to ask about his medical history." Jonathan hesitated, then led her to a more private corner of the waiting room. "Olivia, is there any possibility, any at all, that Madison's father could be someone in my family?" The question hit her like a physical blow. "What? Why would you ask that?" "The specific constellation of cardiac defects Madison has. They match a pattern we've seen in the Lancaster family line. My grandfather had a similar condition. My cousin died of complications from it at age 16. Olivia's mind raced. It couldn't be possible. It was too absurd, too coincidental. "Your brother," Jonathan said softly. "Jason, was he ever in your hometown?" "About 13 years ago." The blood drained from Olivia's face. How could he know? No one knew. She'd never told anyone, not even her mother. "I need to see Madison," she said, standing abruptly. "Now. Olivia, please." "He wasn't Jason Lancaster to me," she hissed, keeping her voice low despite her rising panic. "He was Jay Thomas, a businessman passing through town. We dated for 3 weeks before he disappeared without a word. I didn't know I was pregnant until a month later. I didn't know his real name until I saw his picture in your father's study years later, after I started working at the mansion." Jonathan's expression shifted from professional concern to shock. "You worked in our home for 8 years, knowing Jason was Madison's father." "I didn't know for certain," Olivia said defensively. "Just suspected. He looked different in the photos, older, more polished. And what was I supposed to do? March up to the big house and announce to Edward Lancaster that his maid was carrying his grandchild?" Before Jonathan could respond, the double doors opened again, and a nurse called Olivia's name. "Ms. Blake, your daughter is asking for you." Madison looked small and pale against the hospital sheets, an IV in her arm and monitoring equipment surrounding her bed. Her eyes brightened when she saw Olivia. "Hey, Mom," she said weakly. "Sorry for scaring you." Olivia fought back tears as she kissed her daughter's forehead. "You have nothing to be sorry for, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" "Better now. Dr. Chen says I have an extra special heart. The rarest and most special," Jonathan confirmed, entering the room behind Olivia. "Which is why we're going to take extra special care of it." Madison studied Jonathan's face. "Am I going to need surgery?" Jonathan pulled up a chair beside the bed. "Eventually, yes, but not today. First, we need to run some tests and adjust your medication. Then we'll make a plan together." "Will it hurt?" "Some parts might be uncomfortable," he answered honestly. But you'll have your mom with you the whole time, and I'll be overseeing your care personally." While Madison peppered Jonathan with questions about her heart, questions he answered with remarkable patience and clarity, a nurse discreetly motioned Olivia into the hallway. "We need some additional information for our records," she explained, handing Olivia a clipboard, "including family medical history for both parents if available." Olivia stared at the form, the section for father's medical history, a glaring blank. For 12 years, she'd protected Madison from the truth, that her father had used Olivia and vanished, that he was from one of the wealthiest families in Charleston, that he'd gone on to become a rising political star, while his daughter struggled with a life-threatening condition he might have passed to her. "Ma'am," the nurse prompted, "we can leave it blank if you don't have the information." "I need a minute," Olivia murmured, stepping away. She found herself in a quiet corridor, staring out a window at the hospital's immaculate grounds. The Lancaster name was everywhere. On the building, the gardens, even the benches where visitors sat. A kingdom built on wealth that should have been shared with Madison. "Olivia." She turned to find Jonathan standing behind her, his expression grave. "I need to know the truth," he said quietly. "All of it. Not just for Madison's medical care, but because," he took a deep breath, "because I've found evidence that you might be my grandfather's daughter." Olivia let out a startled laugh. "What? That's impossible." "The pendant," Jonathan insisted. "It was given to your mother by Walter Lancaster. I found his journals. He believed he fathered a child with Linda Blake. You." The world seemed to tilt under Olivia's feet. "My mother never mentioned anyone named Lancaster. She wouldn't have used his name. They kept their relationship secret. But the timing fits. Olivia, you were born while she was working for my grandfather. And there's more. If you're Walter's daughter, that makes you Edward's half-sister, Jason's aunt, Madison's great-aunt," Olivia whispered, the implications crashing down on her. That's not possible. It would explain why my father was so quick to believe you capable of theft," Jonathan continued. "He must have recognized the connection and panicked. If word got out that he'd evicted his own half-sister..." "Stop," Olivia held up her hand. "This is too much. My daughter is lying in a hospital bed with a heart condition that might kill her. I can't process ancient family secrets right now." Jonathan nodded, his expression softening. "You're right. Madison comes first. But we can't ignore this, Olivia. If Jason is her father, we need his medical history. And if you're a Lancaster by birth, you're entitled to far more than a place in a volunteer medical program." Olivia met his gaze, steel entering her voice. "I want nothing from your family except proper medical care for my daughter. As for Jason, do what you need to do, but keep him away from Madison until I decide if he deserves to know her." As she turned to return to Madison's room, Jonathan caught her arm gently. "There's one more thing you should know. If you're Walter's daughter and Jason is Madison's father, it means I'm her great-uncle." His blue eyes held a mixture of concern and something deeper, an emotion Olivia wasn't ready to name, which complicates certain feelings I've been developing. Olivia pulled away, her cheeks flushing. "Madison needs me," she said, avoiding his implication. "The rest can wait." But as she walked back to her daughter's room, Olivia knew that nothing, not her identity, not Madison's paternity, not her growing connection to Jonathan, could remain unaddressed for long. The secrets of the past were unraveling, and the consequences would change all their lives forever. Jonathan stood in his brother's campaign office, surrounded by Lancaster for Senate posters that featured Jason's carefully curated image. Handsome, confident, trustworthy, the irony wasn't lost on him. "This better be important," Jason said as he strode in. Closing the door behind him, at 42, he was the spitting image of their father. Same commanding presence, same calculating eyes. "I've got a fundraiser in 30 minutes. It's about Madison Blake," Jonathan replied, watching his brother's face carefully. Nothing, not even a flicker of recognition. "Who?" 12-year-old girl, congenital heart defect, currently in the cardiac unit at our hospital. Jonathan paused. "Her mother is Olivia Blake, Dad's former housekeeper." Jason shrugged, straightening his already perfect tie. "And this concerns me because genetic testing strongly suggests you're Madison's father." Jason froze. his politician's mask slipping for just a second before he recovered with a practiced laugh. That's absurd. Some housekeeper is trying to scam her way into Lancaster money. Olivia's not some housekeeper, Jonathan countered. And she hasn't asked for anything. I'm the one who ran the tests after noticing Madison has the same heart condition that runs in our family. So what? Cardiac problems are common, not this specific combination of defects, Jonathan insisted, pulling a folder from his briefcase. It's the same pattern grandfather had, the same one that killed cousin Michael. The genetic markers are unmistakable, Jason. His brother's face hardened. Even if there's some medical coincidence. It doesn't prove paternity. I've never heard of this woman. 13 years ago, you spent 3 weeks in Colombia on that economic development project for Dad. Olivia lived there then. She knew you as J. Thomas. A flicker of something. Recognition, guilt, fear, crossed Jason's face before disappearing behind his political veneer. I meet thousands of people in my line of work. I can't be expected to remember every name or face. This isn't going away, Jason, Jonathan said quietly. Madison needs a comprehensive medical history from her father's side, and more importantly, she deserves to know who her father is. Jason advanced on his brother, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Listen carefully. I'm 6 points ahead in the polls. In 18 months, I could be a U.S. senator. Nothing, and I mean nothing, is going to derail that, especially not some ridiculous paternity claim from a woman fired for theft. She wasn't fired for theft, Jonathan corrected. She was fired because Dad realized she might be his half-sister. That stopped Jason cold. What the hell are you talking about? Jonathan explained the discovery of Walter's journals, the significance of the emerald pendant, and the mounting evidence that Olivia was their grandfather's daughter with Linda Blake. This is insane, Jason muttered, pacing the office. You're telling me this woman is potentially our aunt, and He couldn't finish the sentence. Had a relationship with her, yes, though neither of you knew about the family connection at the time. Jason collapsed into his desk chair, genuine shock replacing his political facade. Does Dad know about Madison being He suspects, Jonathan confirmed. I haven't shared the genetic results with him yet, but he's been tracking my involvement with Olivia and Madison. He knows something's going on. This cannot get out, Jason said, a hint of desperation creeping into his voice. Do you understand what this would do to my career, to my marriage? Jonathan had expected denial, perhaps even anger, but the naked panic in his brother's eyes surprised him. Madison is a child who needs medical treatment. Treatment our family can easily provide. That should be the priority here. Of course she should get treatment, Jason snapped. The Lancaster Foundation can cover it anonymously. Set up a special fund or something. But my name cannot be attached to this in any way. She's your daughter. She's a complication I can't afford right now. Jason exploded, then immediately lowered his voice. Look, I'm sorry she's sick, truly. But becoming a father to some random kid from a decade-old fling isn't an option for me. The coldness in his brother's voice shocked Jonathan. This isn't about your campaign, Jason. It's about doing the right thing. Always the idealist, Jason scoffed. While you were playing doctor in Europe, I was here building something. The Lancaster name means something in politics now. I can do real good for people. Thousands of people if I win this election. At the expense of your own daughter, Jason stood abruptly. I want paternity tests, real ones, not some half-baked medical conjecture, and I want them kept completely confidential. I've already ordered them, Jonathan replied. Results will be back in 3 days. Until then, this conversation never happened. Jason straightened his jacket, his politician's mask firmly back in place. And Jonathan, if you breathe a word of this to anyone, especially the press, I'll make sure that fancy volunteer program of yours loses its funding so fast your head will spin. After Jason left, Jonathan sat alone in the campaign office, surrounded by his brother's smiling face on dozens of posters. The man promising to put families first couldn't even acknowledge his own child. At Lancaster Memorial Hospital, Olivia sat beside Madison's bed, helping her with homework the school had sent over. 3 days in the hospital had stabilized her condition, but the doctors wanted to monitor her for at least another 48 hours. Mom, you're doing it again? Madison said, nudging Olivia's arm. Doing what? Staring into space instead of helping me with fractions. Olivia forced a smile. Sorry, sweetie, Just thinking. About Dr. Jonathan? Madison asked with the knowing look of a child who sees more than adults realize. He likes you. It's obvious. It's complicated, Olivia hedged. Because he's a Lancaster and they fired you, or because of the other stuff I'm not supposed to know about. Olivia's head snapped up. What other stuff? Madison rolled her eyes. Mom, the walls in our apartment are super thin. I heard you and Dr. Jonathan talking yesterday. Is it true he might be my great-uncle? Olivia's heart sank. She'd tried so hard to protect Madison from the chaos of these revelations. We don't know anything for sure yet, she said carefully. Dr. Jonathan is looking into some family connections. And is Jason Lancaster really my dad? The direct question caught Olivia off guard. Madison, it's okay if he is, Madison continued, surprisingly calm. I googled him. He's running for Senate. He seems important. Hey, Olivia took her daughter's hands. You are what's important, not Jason Lancaster or anyone else. We've been a team, just the two of us for 12 years. Nothing changes that. Madison nodded, but her expression remained thoughtful. If he is my dad, and you're Dr. Jonathan's aunt, does that make our family tree super weird? Despite everything? Olivia laughed. The weirdest. A knock at the door interrupted them. Edward Lancaster stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable but determined. Mr. Lancaster, Olivia said, rising from her chair. What are you doing here? I came to see my granddaughter, he replied, his eyes moving to Madison. If that's what she is. Madison stared at the imposing figure with undisguised curiosity. You're Jason's dad. I saw your picture on his campaign website. Edward's expression softened slightly as he approached the bed. And you're Madison. Jonathan has told me about your condition. How are you feeling? Better, Madison answered. Dr. Jonathan says I have a special heart. Lancaster hearts have always been troublesome, Edward agreed, surprising both Olivia and Madison with his candor. My father, your great-grandfather perhaps, had similar issues. Olivia watched this interaction with growing unease. Madison, why don't you rest for a bit while Mr. Lancaster and I talk outside? Once in the hallway, Olivia confronted him. What are you doing? You can't just walk in and claim her as your granddaughter when your son won't even acknowledge her existence. Jonathan told me about the genetic testing, Edward said, and about his suspicions regarding your parentage. So now you believe I'm Walter Lancaster's daughter. Convenient timing, considering you fired me without a second thought when it suited you. Edward had the grace to look ashamed. I made a mistake. Several, in fact. He glanced around the busy hospital corridor. Is there somewhere more private we can talk? They found an empty consultation room nearby. Edward closed the door and turned to face Olivia, his authoritative demeanor faltering. I knew who you were when you applied for the housekeeper position, he admitted. I recognized your mother's name on your reference form. I wanted to see you, to know what kind of person Walter's daughter had become. You knew all along. Olivia's voice rose with indignation. You let me clean your toilets for 8 years while knowing I was your sister. Half-sister, Edward corrected automatically, then winced at his own tactlessness. I wasn't certain your mother had other relationships around that time, and the payments stopped going to her account years before you appeared in Charleston. Because she died, Olivia said flatly. When I was 10, Edward looked genuinely surprised. I didn't know. The banker simply informed me the account had been closed. He paused. If you are Walter's daughter, legally, I don't want your money. Olivia cut him off. But Madison deserves the best medical care, regardless of who her grandfather is. Of course, Edward agreed quickly. I've already instructed Jonathan to spare no expense. And if the paternity test confirms Jason is her father, he trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. What then? Your son made it quite clear he wants nothing to do with us. Edward's expression hardened. Jason will do what's right for this family, whether he likes it or not. As he left, Olivia couldn't help but wonder, was Edward Lancaster genuinely concerned for Madison's welfare? Or was he simply doing damage control to protect the family name? Either way, the walls of secrecy were crumbling, and revelations long buried were coming to light, with consequences none of them could predict. The test results are conclusive, Jonathan said, sliding the folder across the mahogany table in Edward's study. 99.8% probability that Jason is Madison's biological father. Edward opened the folder with a grim expression. Across the room, Diane paced like a caged animal, aged, her normally perfect appearance slightly disheveled from the stress of the past few days. "And the other matter?" Edward asked, his voice carefully controlled. "The DNA comparison between you and Olivia shows a clear half-sibling relationship," Jonathan confirmed. "She is Walter Lancaster's daughter." Without question, Edward closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the news. "So I fired and publicly humiliated my own half-sister, while your son abandoned his daughter," Jonathan added pointedly. "A daughter who may have inherited a life-threatening heart condition from our family line." "This is preposterous," Diane snapped. "Some conniving housekeeper claims to be family, and suddenly we're supposed to welcome her with open arms. What's next? A seat on the board of Lancaster Enterprises. Legally, she's entitled to a portion of father's estate," Edward said quietly. "An estate I've been managing for 33 years as the sole heir." Diane's face contorted with fury. "You cannot be serious, Edward. This woman has been cleaning our toilets while her daughter suffers from a heart condition that's killing her." Jonathan interrupted, his patience worn thin. "A condition our family could have been treating properly for years if we'd acknowledged her." "The timing is suspicious," Diane insisted. "First, she steals my emeralds, and when that doesn't work, she concocts this absurd story about being a Lancaster." "She didn't concoct anything," Jonathan countered. "I discovered the connection, not her, and she's never asked for money or recognition." "Enough." Edward rose from his chair, silencing both his wife and son. "What's done is done. The question now is how we address this situation moving forward." He turned to Jonathan. "What are Madison's treatment options?" "She needs surgery," Jonathan said, grateful for the shift to medical matters, "preferably within the next month. I've consulted with the top pediatric cardiac surgeons in the country. Dr. Elena Ramirez at Mayo Clinic is the best for this particular condition." Edward nodded decisively. "Make the arrangements, full private care, all expenses covered." "And Olivia," Jonathan pressed. "Will you acknowledge her publicly?" The door burst open before Edward could respond. Alexis stormed in, waving her phone like a weapon. "Is it true? The housekeeper is claiming to be grandfather's illegitimate daughter?" Diane rushed to her daughter's side. "It's a ploy, darling. Some ridiculous attempt to get her hands on Lancaster money." "The DNA tests confirm it," Edward corrected wearily. "Olivia Blake is my half-sister." Alexis's face flushed with anger. "And you're just going to accept this? Let some nobody waltz in and claim part of our inheritance? It's not about money," Jonathan tried to explain. "Madison needs—" "Oh, please," Alexis interrupted with a dismissive wave. "It's always about money. She worked here for years. She knows exactly how much wealth this family has. Perhaps we should discuss this as a family," Edward suggested, eyeing Jonathan meaningfully. "Privately." Jonathan stood his ground. "I'm taking Olivia to meet with the lawyers tomorrow. She has a right to know what she's entitled to under grandfather's will. You've become quite the champion for Miss Blake," Diane observed coldly. "One might almost suspect your interest goes beyond professional concern." Jonathan felt heat rise to his face, but kept his expression neutral. "My only concern is doing what's right, something this family seems to have forgotten." After a tense standoff, Jonathan left the mansion, the weight of generations of Lancaster secrets heavy on his shoulders. As he drove toward the modest apartment where Olivia and Madison were now settling back in after the hospital stay, he couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of legal meetings, medical consultations, and increasingly tense family dynamics. Edward, after initial resistance, had formally recognized Olivia as Walter Lancaster's daughter and his half-sister, entitling her to a substantial portion of the Lancaster fortune. The revelation had sent shockwaves through Charleston's elite social circles. With gossip spreading faster than wildfire, Jason had grudgingly acknowledged paternity, after Edward threatened to cut him off financially, but insisted on keeping the information out of the public eye until after the Senate election. A private trust was established for Madison's medical care and future education. For Olivia, the transformation was dizzying. After years of struggling paycheck to paycheck, she suddenly had access to resources beyond her imagination. But wealth, she quickly discovered, came with its own complications. "How are you feeling?" Jonathan asked as they sat on the balcony of Olivia's new waterfront condo, a temporary arrangement Edward had insisted on until the legal matters were settled. Like I'm living someone else's life, Olivia admitted, watching Madison splash in the rooftop pool with a physical therapist Jonathan had hired to help strengthen her heart. A month ago, I was scrubbing floors. Now I'm apparently worth millions. You deserve every penny, Jonathan said, his blue eyes intense. And not just because of DNA. You're remarkable, Olivia. The way you've raised Madison, how you've handled everything life's thrown at you. Olivia looked away, uncomfortable with his admiration. I did what any mother would do. Not any mother, he disagreed softly. And not any person would maintain their dignity through what my family put you through. The tension between them had been building since the hospital. A complicated attraction neither was willing to fully acknowledge. The discovery that they weren't biologically related as once feared had removed one obstacle, but others remained. I broke up with Isabella, Jonathan said suddenly. My fiancé. I called off the engagement last week. Olivia's heart skipped. Because of everything happening here. Partly, he admitted, but mostly because I realized I had feelings for someone else. Someone I couldn't stop thinking about, even when I tried. Before Olivia could respond, Madison approached, wrapped in a towel and looking exhausted but happy. Doctor, Jonathan, did you see me do 4 laps? She asked proudly. That's one more than yesterday. I did, he grinned. You're getting stronger every day. Soon you'll be ready for the surgery. Madison's smile dimmed slightly. Will it hurt a lot? You'll be asleep for the worst part, Jonathan assured her. And afterward, you'll have the best care in the world. Your mom will be with you the whole time, and so will I. After Madison went inside to shower, Jonathan turned back to Olivia. I meant what I said, about my feelings, but I understand if it's too complicated too soon. It is complicated, Olivia agreed, meeting his gaze. But not for the reasons you might think. Madison adores you, and if things didn't work out between us, I would never abandon her, Jonathan promised, regardless of what happens between us. The moment was interrupted by Olivia's phone ringing, Edward's name flashing on the screen. Oh, Olivia. His voice was uncharacteristically urgent. Are you and Madison coming to the family dinner tonight? We plan to, she replied, surprised by his tone. Is something wrong? No, he said too quickly. I just wanted to make sure Diane ordered enough food and to remind you not to eat beforehand. The chef is preparing something special. After hanging up, Olivia frowned. That was odd. Edward sounded almost nervous. Jonathan's expression darkened. My father doesn't get nervous. He was checking to make sure you'll be there for some reason. You think he's planning something? I think this family transition hasn't been as smooth as he's pretending, Jonathan replied carefully. Diane and Alexis, in particular, are not happy about sharing the Lancaster fortune. Later that evening, as they prepared for the Lancaster family dinner, Madison suddenly doubled over in pain. Mom, she gasped, her face pale. I don't feel good. Olivia rushed to her side. What's wrong? Is it your heart? No, my stomach. It hurts really bad and I'm so dizzy. Alarmed, Olivia called Jonathan, who arrived within minutes. One look at Madison and he was on the phone with the hospital. How long has she been like this? He asked, checking her pulse and pupils. It came on suddenly, Olivia explained. She was fine all day, then just started feeling sick about an hour ago. Jonathan's expression grew increasingly troubled as he examined Madison. Did she eat or drink anything unusual today? Nothing outside of what you approved except... Olivia paused, remembering. Alexis stopped by this morning with a gift basket. There were some chocolates that Madison ate. Jonathan's head snapped up. Alexis came here personally. She said she wanted to welcome her new niece properly, Olivia said, a chill running down her spine at Jonathan's reaction. You don't think... I think we need to get Madison to the hospital now, Jonathan said grimly, and have those chocolates tested. As they rushed Madison to the emergency room, Olivia could hardly believe what Jonathan was suggesting. Would Diane and Alexis really go so far as to poison a child to protect their inheritance? But as Madison's condition deteriorated in the car, one thing became crystal clear. Someone wanted to ensure they never made it to the Lancaster family dinner that night. Arsenic, Dr. Chen confirmed, sliding the toxicology report across the desk to Jonathan. Low dose, but enough to cause significant symptoms in someone with Madison's cardiac vulnerability. Jonathan stared at the report in disbelief, though part of him had expected exactly this. "You're certain? The lab ran the test twice, doctor." Chen replied, "The chocolates Ms. Blake brought in contained trace amounts. Whoever did this was smart. The dose was small enough that it could be explained away as accidental contamination. But not to someone who knows what to look for," Jonathan concluded grimly. "Exactly, in a healthy adult. This dose would cause discomfort but not serious harm, in Madison, with her heart condition." Jonathan didn't need her to finish the thought. "Has Detective Rivera arrived?" "She's waiting in the conference room. This is now officially a police matter, Jonathan." After updating Dr. Chen on Madison's condition, stable but still requiring close monitoring, Jonathan headed to meet with the detective. Olivia was already there, her face drawn with exhaustion and fear. "Dr. Lancaster," Detective Rivera greeted him with a firm handshake. "I understand you suspect a member of your family attempted to poison your patient." "My niece," Jonathan corrected, sitting beside Olivia. "Madison is my niece. Technically my great-niece. And yes, I believe my sister-in-law Alexis Lancaster deliberately gave her poisoned chocolates." Rivera's expression remained professionally neutral. "That's a serious accusation against a prominent member of the community." "The toxicology report confirms arsenic poisoning," Jonathan countered, pushing the folder toward her. "And Alexis is the only person who had both motive and opportunity." "Motive being," Olivia spoke up, her voice steadier than Jonathan expected. "Money. Madison's medical trust fund will come from the Lancaster estate. The more of us with claims to the fortune, the less for Alexis. And you've recently been acknowledged as Edward Lancaster's half-sister," Rivera noted, consulting her notes, "making you another claimant to the family fortune." "I don't care about their money," Olivia insisted. "I just want my daughter to be safe and healthy." "Nevertheless, the timing is notable," Rivera observed. "Have there been other incidents, threats, confrontations, anything that might establish a pattern?" Jonathan and Olivia exchanged glances. "Alexis has been vocal about her opposition to Olivia's inclusion in the family," Jonathan said carefully, "but nothing that crossed into criminal territory until now. I'll need to interview Miss Lancaster," Rivera stated, making a note, "and I'd like officers posted outside Madison's room until we're certain there's no ongoing threat." After the detective left, Olivia collapsed into Jonathan's arms, finally allowing herself to break down. "My baby," she sobbed against his chest. "They tried to kill my baby." Jonathan held her tightly, his own anger building into a cold, focused rage. "They won't get away with this," he promised. "I won't let them. She's so small, Jonathan, so innocent. What kind of monster?" "The kind who values money over human life," he answered grimly. "But it ends now." Olivia pulled back, wiping her tears. "What are you going to do?" "First, I'm going to make sure Madison has round-the-clock security. Not just police, but private guards I personally trust. Then I'm going to confront my father." "You think Edward was involved?" Olivia asked, her eyes widening. "I don't know," Jonathan admitted. "But he either knew what Alexis was planning, or he should have known either way. He's responsible." The Lancaster mansion was unusually quiet when Jonathan arrived. The staff moved through the halls like ghosts, clearly sensing the tension that had engulfed the family in recent weeks. He found Edward in his study, nursing a glass of scotch and staring at old family photographs. His father looked up at his entrance, his expression unreadable. "You missed dinner," Edward noted, along with Olivia and Madison. "Madison was being treated for arsenic poisoning," Jonathan said without preamble, watching his father's face carefully. "Someone put it in chocolates Alexis brought to their apartment." Edward's glass froze halfway to his lips. That's not possible. The toxicology reports say otherwise," Jonathan countered, tossing the file onto his father's desk. "Where is Alexis now?" "I'm right here," Alexis announced from the doorway, her expression one of practiced indignation. "And I resent whatever accusations you're making. Jonathan, I was simply trying to welcome the child to the family. With poisoned chocolates." Jonathan's voice was deadly quiet. "Detective Rivera will be here shortly to interview you. I suggest you find a good lawyer." Alexis laughed. though Jonathan detected a note of nervousness. "This is absurd. Why would I harm a child?" $60 million, Jonathan replied. "That's Madison's share of grandfather's estate, now that her relationship to Jason has been established, plus whatever portion Olivia is entitled to as father's half-sister. That's a significant reduction in your inheritance." "You have no proof I did anything wrong," Alexis insisted, though her confident facade was cracking. "The chocolates tested positive for arsenic," Jonathan stated flatly. "The box had your fingerprints all over it. The boutique where they were purchased has security footage of you buying them yesterday." This last part was a bluff. The police investigation had only just begun, but the flash of panic in Alexis's eyes told Jonathan all he needed to know. "Alexis," Edward's voice was dangerously soft. "Tell me you didn't do this." "It was Mother's idea," Alexis blurted, then immediately covered her mouth, realizing her mistake. The silence that followed was deafening. Edward slowly rose from his chair, his face ashen. "Diane put you up to this." Alexis's composure crumbled entirely. "She said we needed to send a message. That's all. The dose wasn't meant to be fatal, just enough to scare them away. Mother said, once they saw how dangerous Charleston could be for them, they'd take the settlement offer and leave town for good." "Settlement offer?" Jonathan echoed. "What settlement offer?" Edward wouldn't meet his son's eyes. "I had the lawyers draft a one-time payment option. In exchange for a significant sum, Olivia would waive all future claims to the Lancaster estate and move away from Charleston. You were going to pay her to disappear," Jonathan translated, disgust evident in his voice, "after acknowledging her as your sister." "It was a contingency plan," Edward defended weakly. "I never intended to actually offer it unless things became complicated." "Things like your wife and daughter attempting to murder your granddaughter?" Jonathan asked incredulously. "That kind of complicated." The sound of the doorbell interrupted their confrontation. Henry, the family's longtime butler, appeared moments later. "Detective Rivera to see you, sir. She's in the foyer with 2 officers. Edward's shoulders slumped in defeat. "Show them in, Henry." As the detective entered, Jonathan stepped back, watching as his family's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. Alexis, realizing the severity of her situation, began sobbing dramatically, while Edward seemed to age a decade in minutes. "Mrs. Lancaster," Detective Rivera began, "I'd like to ask you some questions about a delivery you made to Olivia Blake's residence this morning." Back at the hospital, Madison opened her eyes to find her mother sleeping uncomfortably in a chair beside her bed. The room was dark, except for the soft glow of monitoring equipment. "Mom," she whispered. Olivia immediately jerked awake. "Madison, how are you feeling, sweetheart?" "Better," Madison said, although her voice was weak. "What happened?" Olivia hesitated, unsure how much to tell her daughter. "You had a bad reaction to something you ate. The doctors are taking good care of you." Madison studied her mother's face, too perceptive for her 12 years. "It was the chocolates from Aunt Alexis, wasn't it? They made me sick on purpose." Olivia's heart broke at the matter-of-fact way Madison stated this. "We don't know for sure." "It's okay." "Mom, I'm not a baby," Madison interrupted. "I heard Dr. Chen talking to the nurse. She said someone tried to poison me." Tears filled Olivia's eyes. "I'm so sorry, Madison. I never thought. I should have protected you better." "It's not your fault," Madison said with surprising maturity. "Some people just aren't good. Like in the books we read, there are heroes and villains." "And which are we?" Olivia asked, trying to lighten the moment. Madison thought for a moment. "We're the ones who survive," she decided. "The ones who find out they're stronger than anyone knew." Before Olivia could respond, the door opened and Jonathan entered, his face drawn but determined. "Alexis has been arrested," he announced quietly, "and Diane is being questioned as an accomplice. My father is cooperating with the investigation." "What happens now?" Olivia asked. Jonathan moved to Madison's bedside, gently checking her vital signs with the practiced hands of a physician. "Now we focus on getting Madison better. Her surgery is scheduled for next week at Mayo Clinic. Dr. Ramirez is flying in tomorrow to meet with us." Madison caught Jonathan's hand. "Will you stay with us? Through everything?" Jonathan's expression softened as he looked from Madison to Olivia. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised. "We're family now, for better or worse. and I think we've already seen the worst." But as Madison drifted back to sleep, both Olivia and Jonathan knew that the Lancaster family's secrets were only beginning to unravel. The worst, they feared, might still be to come. Edward Lancaster looked frail in his hospital bed, the heart attack having drained whatever vigor his 65 years had left him. Machines beeped steadily, monitoring the patriarch whose iron will had shaped the Lancaster empire and destroyed lives in the process. "He's been asking for you," the nurse told Olivia as she hesitated outside the cardiac care unit. "For both of you, actually." Beside her, Jonathan squeezed her hand reassuringly. "We don't have to do this now. Madison's surgery is tomorrow. Dr. Ramirez said she's stable and ready," Olivia replied. "And your father? The doctors aren't optimistic, are they?" Jonathan shook his head. "The damage was extensive. He could recover, but..." He left the sentence unfinished. 3 days had passed since Edward collapsed during his interview with Detective Rivera. The stress of Alexis's arrest, coupled with the revelation of Diane's involvement in the poisoning plot, had proven too much for his heart. Now, with Madison's critical surgery approaching and the Lancaster family in shambles, Edward had requested what might be his final family meeting. They entered the room to find Jason already there, standing awkwardly by the window. He nodded stiffly at their arrival but said nothing. The friction between the brothers had intensified since Jason's continued reluctance to publicly acknowledge Madison as his daughter. "You came." Edward's voice was weak but clear. "All of you, good. What's this about, Dad?" Jason asked impatiently. "I have a press conference in 2 hours to address Alexis's situation." "Situation," Jonathan echoed incredulously. "Our sister attempted to murder a child, your daughter, and you're calling it a situation." Jason's jaw tightened. "The campaign is hanging by a thread. Every word matters now." "Enough," Edward commanded, a flash of his old authority silencing both sons. "I didn't bring you here to argue. I brought you here because it's time for the truth. All of it." He motioned for Olivia to come closer. She approached cautiously, still uncertain of her place in this fractured family. "The DNA test was partially right," Edward began. His breath labored. "You are related to the Lancaster family, but not as my half-sister." Olivia blinked in confusion. "What do you mean the test showed we share a father?" "No," Edward interrupted. "It showed we share a male relative. The test identified a paternal connection, but couldn't specify exactly what that connection was without more samples." Jonathan leaned forward, medical training kicking in. "You're saying Walter wasn't Olivia's father? Then who?" "Andrew Carter," Edward said, meeting Olivia's eyes directly. "My father's cousin. Your mother worked for both of them. She and Andrew had a brief affair before she became involved with my father." "How long have you known this?" Jonathan demanded. "I suspected when I found letters among my father's things after his death," Edward admitted. "But I only confirmed it recently, when I had the lab run a more comprehensive comparison." Olivia felt the room spinning slightly. "So I'm not a Lancaster at all." "You are," Edward insisted. "The Carters are a branch of the Lancaster family. Andrew died young, never knowing Linda was pregnant. My father believed you were his, which is why he gave your mother the pendant. It was his promise to acknowledge you eventually." "Why tell us this now?" Olivia asked, trying to process this new revelation. Edward's gaze shifted between Olivia and Jonathan. "Because I've seen how you two look at each other. The connection between you isn't inappropriate, as you feared. You're distant cousins at most, not aunt and nephew." Jonathan's hand found Olivia's again, his grip tightening slightly. The implication of Edward's words hung in the air, simultaneously relieving one burden while acknowledging something neither had openly admitted. "There's more," Edward continued, his voice growing weaker, "about the missing emeralds." Jason shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, you need to rest." "I need to make things right," Edward snapped with sudden force. "The emeralds weren't stolen, Olivia. I had them hidden." "What?" Olivia and Jonathan spoke in unison. "When I first noticed the pendant you wore, just that once at the Christmas party, I recognized it immediately. I panicked. If others made the connection, if questions were raised about my father's relationship with your mother," Edward's voice trailed off, "I needed a reason to distance you from the family." "So you framed her for theft," Jonathan concluded. disgust evident in his voice. "I told Diane to report her emeralds missing," Edward acknowledged. "I never expected her to accuse Olivia directly." Things escalated quickly. "Those emeralds were worth over $100,000, Olivia said slowly. "You let me be accused of stealing them, lose my job, my home, my reputation, all to keep your secret. I'm not proud of it," Edward said quietly. "But yes, where are they now?" Jonathan asked. "Alexis has them," Edward replied. "I gave them to her for safekeeping, but he hesitated. She developed her own plans. She was supposed to find them eventually, clearing Olivia's name once she was safely gone from Charleston. Instead, she kept them." Jason cursed under his breath. "This just keeps getting better. First attempted murder, now theft. The Lancaster name will be mud by the time this is over." "Your name," Olivia echoed, anger finally breaking through her shock. "What about my life? What about Madison? She could have died because of your family's secrets and lies. Which brings me to my final confession," Edward said, his voice fading as fatigue overtook him. "Jason, you're not the first Lancaster to abandon a child. Your grandfather did it. I did it." Jason's head snapped up. "What are you talking about? Columbia, 1989, Teresa Vasquez," Edward said, watching recognition dawn in his son's eyes. "She was pregnant when you left for college. I paid her to disappear, just like my father paid Linda Blake." The color drained from Jason's face. "You never told me you were 18, with a bright future ahead of you," Edward explained wearily. "I did what I thought was best, just like you thought abandoning Olivia was best for your career." A heavy silence filled the room as the cycle of Lancaster men abandoning their responsibilities became painfully clear. 3 generations of secrets, lies, and children growing up without fathers. "I'm setting it right, as much as I can," Edward continued. "I've changed my will. Half my personal fortune goes to Olivia, as compensation for the years of injustice. The other half goes to Jonathan." He looked directly at Jason. "You and Alexis are disinherited, though the trusts established by your mother's family remain untouched." "You can't do that," Jason protested, though his voice lacked conviction. "It's done," Edward replied. "Signed yesterday. My attorney has instructions to provide evidence of your knowledge of Alexis's plan to the prosecutors unless you publicly acknowledge Madison as your daughter and provide ongoing support." Jason's political mask cracked completely. "You're blackmailing me into being a father." "I'm giving you one last chance to be a better man than I was," Edward corrected, "than any Lancaster man has been in 3 generations. He turned back to Olivia, his expression softening. "I can never undo the harm I've caused you, but I hope this will give Madison the security she deserves, and you the freedom to build whatever life you choose." His eyes moved to Jonathan. "With whomever you choose." The heart monitor began beeping more rapidly as Edward's face contorted in pain. Jonathan immediately pressed the call button, his doctor's instincts taking over. "He's having another cardiac event," Jonathan told the rushing medical team. "Possible myocardial rupture." As they were ushered from the room, Olivia found herself standing between the Lancaster brothers, one who had fathered her child and abandoned them both, the other who had slowly become the most important person in her life besides Madison. "Did you know?" she asked Jason quietly. "About the emeralds? About the poisoning?" Jason shook his head, his political facade completely gone. "No, but I should have. I should have paid attention to what was happening in my own family instead of chasing power." He looked at her directly for perhaps the first time. "Madison, does she know I'm her father?" "She knows," Olivia confirmed. "She's known since the hospital." "I'd like to see her," Jason said tentatively, "before her surgery tomorrow, if that's okay with you." Olivia glanced at Jonathan, who gave her a subtle nod of support. She'd like that, she decided. She's always wondered about you, as doctors worked desperately to save Edward Lancaster's life. His sons and the woman who had once cleaned his home stood together in the hospital corridor, a fractured family, facing an uncertain future, bound by secrets finally brought to light. 6 months had passed since Edward Lancaster's funeral. The Charleston summer had given way to fall, painting the landscape in rich golds and reds. The Lancaster mansion, once a symbol of old money and cold opulence, had undergone a transformation almost as dramatic as the family itself. Olivia stood on the terrace, watching as workers installed the final panel of the new solar array. Her first major decision as co-owner of the estate, the renovation had been extensive, opening up the dark, stuffy rooms to light and air, converting the east wing into a residential treatment center for children with cardiac conditions, repurposing the formal gardens into a healing space with wheelchair-accessible paths. "The last of Diane's things were packed up this morning," Jonathan said, joining her with 2 cups of coffee. "The Montreal house is ready for her when she's released." Diane had pleaded guilty to conspiracy charges, accepting a reduced sentence in exchange for testimony against Alexis, whose trial was scheduled for spring. Mother and daughter would eventually reunite in Canada, where the Lancaster family had arranged a comfortable exile, far from Charleston and the lives they had nearly destroyed. "How's Jason handling the transition?" Olivia asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. Jonathan's smile was wry. "Surprisingly well, actually. Losing the Senate race was a blow, but I think it forced him to reevaluate his priorities. Madison mentioned he called again yesterday. He's taking her to a father-daughter dance at her new school next weekend," Olivia confirmed. Their 3rd outing this month. It had been a hesitant beginning. Jason's first meeting with Madison before her surgery had been awkward, laden with 13 years of absence and recently revealed truths. But Madison, with her remarkable capacity for forgiveness, had given her father the chance that Olivia wasn't sure he deserved. The relationship was developing slowly, built on Madison's terms, something Jason had humbly accepted. "Dr. Ramirez says her latest echocardiogram looks perfect," Jonathan said, his professional tone unable to mask his personal pride. "The surgery was even more successful than we hoped. Her prognosis is excellent." Olivia felt the familiar swell of gratitude. Madison's recovery had been nothing short of miraculous. A 12-hour surgery followed by weeks of intensive care. Then months of careful rehabilitation. The child who once couldn't walk to school without chest pain had recently completed a 5K charity walk for pediatric heart research. "I've been thinking about the foundation," Olivia said, turning to face Jonathan. "I want to expand our mission beyond medical support. So many of these families struggle with practical needs: housing, transportation, lost wages when they need to care for a sick child." Jonathan's eyes softened. "Just when I think I couldn't possibly admire you more." The Olivia Blake Foundation had been her first initiative after inheriting half of Edward's fortune. Initially focused on providing medical care for children with heart conditions similar to Madison's, it had quickly grown into one of Charleston's most respected charitable organizations. "I'm just trying to make something good come from all this," Olivia said, gesturing toward the mansion. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life now, that I belong here. You belong wherever you choose to be," Jonathan corrected gently. "This house, this wealth, they don't define you. They never have." A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the sunset paint the sky in vivid colors. Their relationship had evolved gradually in the aftermath of Madison's surgery and Edward's death, cautious at first, mindful of the complicated history between them, then deepening as they worked together to reshape the Lancaster legacy. "Have you thought more about my proposal?" Jonathan asked, his voice carefully casual. Olivia smiled. "Which one? The medical outreach program or the personal one?" "Both, actually, but I was referring to the personal one. 3 weeks earlier, during a quiet dinner at Olivia's favorite restaurant, Jonathan had proposed, not with an ostentatious ring or grand gesture, but with simple, heartfelt words about building a future together. She had asked for time to think, not out of uncertainty about her feelings, but because of what marriage would mean for Madison and their newly constructed lives. "I have," Olivia admitted. "I'm just worried about how it might affect Madison. She's been through so much change already." "Which is why I wanted to show you this," Jonathan said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. Madison's response when I asked for her blessing. Olivia opened the envelope to find a handmade card covered in Madison's artistic doodles. Inside, in her daughter's unmistakable handwriting, was a simple message: "Yes, but I want to be your best man, not a flower girl." "I'm 13 now, Mom." Tears sprang to Olivia's eyes. "You asked her permission." "Of course I did," Jonathan replied. "She's the most important person in your life, and one of the most important in mine." Olivia's laugh was watery as she wiped away tears. "I think that's a yes then to both proposals." Jonathan pulled her close, his kiss tender and promising. "I was thinking a spring wedding. Small, just family and close friends. Here in the garden, your foundation redesigned." "Perfect," Olivia agreed. "And speaking of family," she nodded toward the path leading from the caretaker's cottage, where Madison was walking with 2 younger children, patients from the cardiac center who had quickly become her friends. The transformation in her daughter over the past months had been as remarkable as her physical recovery. Once shy and cautious, Madison had blossomed into a confident young advocate for other children with heart conditions. "Mom, Dr. J," Madison called, waving excitedly. "Did you tell her yet? Did she say yes?" Jonathan laughed. "So much for keeping it a surprise until dinner." "She said yes," he confirmed as Madison approached, the 2 younger children trailing behind her. Madison's whoop of delight echoed across the grounds. "Finally, I've been planning your wedding on Pinterest for weeks," as Madison enthusiastically outlined her vision for their wedding, apparently involving twinkling lights, a live band, and matching formal attire for her therapy dog. Olivia marveled at how completely her life had changed from that terrible day when she'd been accused of theft and thrown out of this very house later that evening as they prepared for a small celebration dinner with Jason and Madison. Olivia found herself drawn to her bedroom dresser. In the top drawer, nestled in a velvet box, lay the emerald pendant, the key that had unlocked the truth of her heritage. Jonathan had retrieved it from Mr. Harrington months ago, returning it to its rightful owner. The half-moon intertwined with a star caught the light as she lifted it from the box. No longer a painful reminder of what she'd nearly lost, it now represented all she had gained: family, truth, and a second chance at happiness. "That would look perfect with your dress tonight," Jonathan suggested from the doorway. Olivia nodded, handing him the necklace and turning so he could fasten it around her neck. "I think it's time to reclaim it, not as a Lancaster heirloom, but as the beginning of our story. Our unconventional, complicated, wonderful story," Jonathan agreed, pressing a kiss to her shoulder, as they descended the grand staircase that Olivia had once polished on her hands and knees. She caught sight of Madison and Jason waiting in the foyer below. Her daughter's laughter echoed through the hall that had once felt so forbidding. The emerald pendant rested against her collarbone, no longer a burden of the past, but a symbol of the future, one built not on secrets and deception, but on truth, forgiveness, and the family they had chosen to become. Outside, the newly renovated Lancaster mansion gleamed in the evening light, not as a monument to wealth and privilege, but as a beacon of healing and second chances. Just like the pendant that had brought them together, the house had been transformed by the truth, becoming something new and beautiful without forgetting its complex history.